Hello, thank you for joining us today for this final GRCOM webinar. We've got a great session today. My name is John Heltzel. I'm the Director for Resilience Planning. We really appreciate you making time for today's presentation. We have an outstanding slate of speakers, and we're looking forward to jumping right into this. Today's adventure is on Cyber Megacity Wars. How close are we to the tipping point? We're going to follow a tightly packed agenda, a short welcome from our president and CEO. Then we'll go through a number of different sessions, allowing our speakers to share with us their thoughts and observations going forward. The first one will be ripped from the headlines. The second one will be cyber as a weapon, non-state actors on state actors and states on state. Then we'll hear from each one of our panelists for a short update on what they think the required actions are. We'll take a brief break for our sponsors to share with us some of their new advances in technology, and then we'll recap right at the end with cyber wishes for 2022. So this is going to be a little bit of a different GRCOM than we've done in the past, but it's going to be action-packed, and I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from our slate of speakers. We've got two great sponsors today that have been with us all year, Omni Threat Structures and Blackstar Tech. We'll get a chance later in the presentation for them to speak and share with us, but we do really appreciate them being part of the GRCOM team. But now it's a real pleasure for me to introduce somebody I have great respect for, Mr. Avi Schnur, who is the CEO and president of the EIS Council. Avi, I'll turn it over to you for your introductory remarks.
Hey, thanks, John. Appreciate it. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants from wherever you are around the world. So this is the last, as John just said, of this year's Global Resilience Commission webinars. And it's a unique webinar with a provocative name. So Cyber Megacity Wars. I thought it might be good to spend just a minute or two talking about the name and what's behind it. So the world has changed, and megacities, the whole concept and potential for megacities is brand new. Because megacities, at the end of the day, really are life support machines. Wherever you have millions of people these days, in some places, tens of millions of people living in close proximity, that's not something that can be taken for granted. It depends on tightly interconnected infrastructures, high-tech infrastructures, and very often with very delicate timing. So what does all that mean? If you look at something on that scale, machines which are designed to support the lives and employment and entertainment and health and everything else of perhaps tens of millions of people, the complexity that you're talking about is extraordinary. And where you have complexity, you have vulnerability. Now, vulnerabilities in particular, our urban centers are something that experts care about and experts work on, each in their own domain. It's not something that most of us tend to think about on a day-to-day basis. I would like to point out that given the scale of the problem and the rate of growth of the problem, this is something that all of us are going to need to start thinking about, because the support that's going to be required to do what is going to have to be done as these hazards continue to increase is something that we have not seen before. And it's not support that's going to come automatically. It's going to require more understanding and more awareness very broadly. So vulnerabilities, what are the vulnerabilities? Well, obviously all of us today are very familiar with pandemics, but of course there are many other extreme hazards out there. There's certainly severe terrestrial weather, potentially severe space weather, major earthquake zones that if they take place in areas where there's sensitive infrastructures could have devastating impact, EMP, or of course, cyber. Cyber is unique because it's not a speculative hazard, of course. It's a hazard that hits on a regular basis, unfortunately, even many times per minute, And especially we see heavy attacks, as I'm sure some of the panelists will be telling us, on critical infrastructures. And perhaps the point of the spear at the end of the day is really on our major urban centers. If you don't happen to live in a megacity, if you're listening to this call from perhaps a small town or somewhere in the country, somewhere around the world, don't be complacent, because everything that keeps all of us going, that keeps our civilization alive, is sufficiently interdependent that if anything extremely serious happened to a city in a major country, it's something that all of us would feel. So I'm looking forward to hearing from these panelists. It is really a unique array of panelists, of experts, each in different dimensions, which will make it possible to examine this hazard from many different angles. So that's something I'm excited about. I'm also excited about the format. As John said, this is going to be different, and it will provide an opportunity to get some real depth and interaction among our panelists. So I'm looking forward to it. We're certainly very interested in your feedback. So if you have any comments, any thoughts after the webinar, certainly shoot us a note. If you haven't had an opportunity to join, it's still free to be a member for the rest of this year. And we'll look forward to your participation on any basis that is of interest to you. Thank you very much. And John, back to you.
Hey, thanks, Avi. Great introduction. You set the stage well for where we're going. I'm going to leave this page up for just a second. You'll notice that we've got an outstanding slate of speakers. I'm going to read their names very quickly, and I'm going to call them by their first names as we go forward. We've got Dr. Paul Stockton. We've got Mark Montgomery, Yossi Schneck, Jonathan Munkin, Dave Hilt, Liz Mann, Rami Afrati, and Brian Harrell with us today. And you can see the companies that they represent, and I'm sure you can find them all on LinkedIn if you are interested. Going forward, though, we're going to be fast-paced, so kind of hang on for the ride here. And I'm going to begin by setting the stage for what we call ripped from the headlines. Cyber attackers are wielding political and economic warfare through ransomware, intelligence gathering, and technological theft. In a highly digitized and networked smart society, cyber risks are threatening energy grids, water treatment plants, governments, defense infrastructure, and medical services, as well as transportation, financial, electoral, and corporate information technology systems. Just this Tuesday, Homeland Security warned that hundreds of millions of devices are at risk from a newly revealed software vulnerability. This vulnerability is one of the most serious I've seen in my entire career, if not the most serious, said Jen Easterly, the director of U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. The vulnerability in the Apache logging package, Log4j, has affected potentially thousands of companies worldwide, with vulnerabilities that continue and new threat and ransomware groups discovering and threatening many different types of systems. Just yesterday, several Hawaii companies and government agencies warned all of their employees that they had been the subject of a new ransomware attack. That particular attack threatened all of their connected systems to the mainland's cloud computing service that manages their payroll, timekeeping, and business management software for thousands of entities worldwide. For the past 6 years, the finance sector has been ranked #1 as the most cyber-attacked industry. In 2020, attacks against banks and other financial institutions climbed an incredible 238%, followed by a further impressive 118% increase in this year alone. According to Analytics, attacks in the financial services sector in 20 and 21 included attacks on servers, data theft, and ransomware cases. It was also found that 57% of those surveyed financial institutions revealed an increase in wire transfer fraud. 54% had experienced destructive attacks where infrastructure was damaged. 41% had suffered brokerage account takeovers. 51% experienced attacks on targeted market strategy data, and 38% suffered attacks originating from hackers that were accessing trusted supply chain partners to gain entry into the bank, and 41% had become victim to manipulated timestamps resulting in funds theft. Palo Alto reported just this week that financial organizations were willing to pay an estimated $450,000 when they're hit with a ransomware attack. Microsoft reported that it had just disrupted the activities of a China-based hacking group that seized websites it used to spread malware. Most of the targets were government agencies, think tanks, and human rights organizations. Google likewise said it had just disrupted a botnet attack of over 1 million compromised Windows computers and servers. The botnet's malware stole passwords, data, and secretly installed crypto mining applications on victims' devices. Ultimately, cybercrime is currently estimated to have collected $6 trillion in 2021, up from $3 trillion just a few years ago. This represents the greatest economic wealth transfer in history. So today's environment is exceptionally challenging. So I'd like to begin by calling on our panel to give us your thoughts against a number of different attributes that we've discussed. Paul, I'd like to start with you. Given the current cyber threat landscape, which we just talked about, what is your perspective on the major national security issues that rise to the top of the food chain?
Thanks, John, for inviting me to participate, and to Avi and the EIS team for making this event possible. You did a terrific job there, John and Avi, of describing the overview of threats to critical infrastructure and networks, which will be focus of much of our discussion today. I'm going to suggest that the greatest national security threat lies elsewhere. I believe that internet-based attacks designed to widen the societal divides within the United States and corrode faith in democratic institutions and governance constitutes the top national security threat to the United States and many of its partner allies around the world, because these attacks corrode the foundations of American power and the foundations of US security alliances around the globe. We need to begin treating the use of the internet to convey disinformation, to corrode faith in democratic governance as the top national security challenge, and maybe one that's even more important than threats to lifeline critical infrastructure. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Paul. That was outstanding. You continued to set the stage. Yoshi, I would like to turn to you now. And with your background working on protecting national level critical infrastructure, how do you assess the threat and prioritize the critical security actions when it seems like the threat continues to evolve? Yossi, you may be muted. Could you? There we go.
You hear me now? Okay. So I start again. So John, thank you for inviting me, and thanks to ICE for this amazing event. You know, I would like to answer you in a little bit different way how we protect, and maybe what we think that we as part of the good guys group are doing not so well or misleading. You talk about the unsecure world, and in my opinion, it's a little bit misleading. It's a little bit misleading because I prefer to call it distorted or not organized world, and I will explain why. Unsecure world leads and motivates the organization and all of us to some trends of, I call it more is better. Not enough security system, not enough devices, not enough techniques, not enough standards, not enough controls. The fact is that there are too many of them. And the common strategy is actually to pursue the integration of all of these elements that I'm talking about in our organization, trying to implement it and thinking that it will surely increase our protection. We in Israel Electric, and I think in many other companies, are thinking that the case is different, and this is what we are implementing in our very, very harsh cyber environment. Yes, it's true. Cyber war is full of details that must be treated. I don't say don't treat them, but we have to order them in a manageable, strategic, and tactic process. We have to be more proactive and not only reactive. We have actually, if you talk just a minute about the event that happened or vulnerability that was found 2 days ago. So all the world is now focused only on it, and you know, and everybody is looking for tools and abilities how to do it. And it means that we are not actually doing something that is managed. We are behaving according to the randomly events that are running, and we in IC are trying to change it. We actually created a very dynamic but very clear and long-term tactic and strategy how to fight it. In addition, we included additional areas that are usually neglected or not taken as part of the cyber sturdiness effort of the organization. And I would say that this is the main thing that we are trying to do or doing already. And again, it's in comparison to what I call random cyber management strategy, full, real, dynamic, but very, very clear strategy that we follow on. And I think that according to our results, it works very well.
That's an excellent approach, Yossi, and I think it best characterizes the direction we've got to go. Let me turn to Mark Montgomery now. Mark, obviously, practical policy decisions are going to have to be made to continue to build cyber resilience to protect both the public and the private critical infrastructures. What do you think are the biggest cyber challenges right now that Congress needs to focus on or prioritize?
Well, listen, I think it's I certainly agree with Paul Stockton about the concerns about disinformation and the need to control, particularly foreign disinformation attacks on our democratic institutions. But I actually think the biggest issue we have to deal with right now is how we secure our most important critical infrastructure. Recognizing, we can't boil the whole ocean here, but we have to really target those infrastructures that are critical to national security, economic stability, public health and safety. And because it's the government, you can't just say everyone you think of, because it'll be down to Vicks dry cleaners on the list, right? What are those top several hundred national assets? Whether it's sections of the energy grid, water systems, transportation systems that are truly critical, and then make the compact with those systems. In other words, the compact of, hey, you need to maintain a certain level of standards that's assessed by a third party. You need to report incidents much faster than any kind of incident reporting laws we're seeing right now. But in return, if you meet these standards, you'll get liability protection against any kind of loss of business actions, when you've been attacked by an advanced persistent threat team. And you'll also get better access to intelligence and ability to help shape the intelligence collection environment. That kind of compact is really the critical thing. It's an actual public-private collaboration that we've been working on for 25 years since PDD 63, but have been wholly unsuccessful, in large part due to the government, but also because the private sector has some trepidation about entering into that compact. But we really have to get to that. So to me, that's the most important next step.
That's outstanding, Mark. I know it's a major challenge, but I appreciate your insights there. Let me turn to John Munkin now for his perspective on this. John, it's true that the ransomware attacks result in a nearly unnavigable market volatility, as you and I have talked about. And we know that the market drives corporate decisions and actions. From your perspective, are there any effective actions or public positions that the providers of utility services can take in advance to make weathering one of these eventual cyber events a more passable opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because essentially when that issue came up, especially following the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, understanding that the degree to which business systems on the IT side and physical systems on the OT side have been integrated have created a circumstance where compromises to those business systems have those downstream impacts to the marketing processes that guide operational decisions, both infrastructure planning and then real-time ops and distribution of product. And so I think one of the key missing pieces here right now, one is just the acknowledgement of that IT-OT convergence and what that means in this particular circumstance of saying, well, if it's limited to our business systems, then we're going to be fine. We can continue to operate, albeit in a degraded mode. Product will still flow and things will continue to work. But the best way in my mind to mitigate that is to develop a contingency market strategy that tries to take into account what the operating conditions would look like in the midst of a cyber compromise, ransomware or otherwise. So trying to understand what you can do to maintain that minimum viable product flow, whether it's electricity or molecules or anything else that's going through your system, making sure that you have a means of continuing to balance those account sheets to the degree that the companies themselves are comfortable with what they're going to be compensated for. Product continues to arrive at the locations that have just-in-time delivery systems and an immediate need for that product. But then it also gives you a better understanding of where these kind of fallback positions are in your system, both from a hardware software perspective, but also from an operations perspective of saying, what operating condition do we need to sustain at a minimum in order to keep all of these things flowing from a market standpoint and from a physical product standpoint. And I think that's something that's widely underdeveloped in the industry of trying to understand if you can't have access to all of your regular corporate IT networks or anything else, what is it that you're going to do to make sure that the wheels continue to move, the cogs continue to move on your side, regardless of the presence of that cyber compromise?
That's outstanding. Kind of the minimum grid concept that we've talked about so many times, and then making the public aware. Thanks, John. That was great. Dave Hill, let me turn to you because one of the things we talked about is this idea of the supply chain. So with some of the most dramatic cyber attacks occurring, one of the ones that stands out the most is the nefarious bad actors that penetrated the Maersk shipping company a few years ago that stranded much of that fleet at sea for several days, and then obviously interrupting port operations around the world, very similar to what we've seen with the pandemic. How do we prepare tightly coupled systems to be flexible enough to withstand these interruptions in the flow of data and information, or can we? Is that a realistic expectation? What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much, John. I think certainly I agree with many of the comments that have been provided so far. Avi noted that we have identifying the critical infrastructures. I just happened to be involved in Y2K some years back, and following that event that evening in Department of Energy's facility, then President Clinton directed DHS to make a list of critical infrastructures in the United States, and there were 17 of them on the list. Energy came out as number one. And there was a note, and it's still in there in this document, that says energy is a unique one in that it enables every other infrastructure, critical infrastructure in North America. But your question's more along how do we deal with some of this, some of these attacks. Certainly, Secretary of Energy Granholm in June was asked whether or not we can, whether adversaries have the ability to take us down, and she said, yes, they do. And I agree. Would it be easy? No. There's numerous points of attack, and I think the key thing is going to be, vigilance. We're really going to have to 92% of the malware that I've seen is delivered via, email or some other method that someone opens up a link. And so I think really it's going to be a matter of vigilance to try to see whether we can manage this. Diversity and tools, certainly some of that, but even some of these, when you're attacked, you have backups of your systems, of your data and so forth. If you made a backup of it, has it already been compromised? Because most of these things, it takes 6 months for them to implement. So I think my answer to it will be we need to really stay on top of it, and people need to be able to recognize that, and we'll talk about that a little more later, I think, about what I really think it's going to take to do that.
Great, great. Thanks, Dave. A good framing up of where we came from and where we find ourselves today. Let me bring Liz into this discussion. Liz, you and I had a chance for a great conversation, but I'd like to give you a chance. You know, the number of hacks and attacks on our medical and healthcare sector continues to rise. Given that so much data is moving to the cloud, what do you think our providers and patients should be doing and thinking about the current environment?
Thank you so much for the question. And you know, I did want to circle back. I want to answer your question, but I want to circle back to some of what Mark and John were saying, because I think it connects to this notion of cloud and where is your data. But very importantly, Jonathan talked about the IT-OT convergence and thinking about what would be necessary for a minimum viable product. And I wanted to add to that what's really necessary is not only identifying those things, but also practicing for the inevitability of having to deal with that. And when we connect that to cloud and to data in the health system, you know, it's the same thing, right? If you and I discussed yesterday that moving to the cloud is not an invitation to change your strategy around securing data and understanding the importance of accessibility to that data. In the case of the healthcare ecosystem, we're particularly interested in this because patient care and quality patient outcomes is at the center of that issue. And when that data is either inaccessible, or compromised in some way, it could impact patient care. But I do think that one of the most challenging issues today for security leaders in both public and private sector institutions is to make that determination of prioritizing those elements of their infrastructure that absolutely must function, understanding what their plan is if they are compromised so that they can get back to functioning as quickly as possible, and especially in that planning, to think about what has to happen first, right? I can live without corporate email or corporate telephone numbers as long as my plants are manufacturing medications that are needed by our patients. So I think it's often a question of how do we narrow the field that is so broad, so wide, an attack surface that's so zero in on the things that matter most and be bold enough and brave enough to make decisions about prioritizing the resources that we have and applying them to the things that are needed most.
So outstanding, Liz. I think you laid out some additional questions we can spend some time on. Let me move forward here and bring in Rami. Rami, if you would come on, and what I'd like you to talk about is, you know, in today's environment, as we've discussed, it ends up being a haven for cyber criminals. Kind of the definition here in the States of the wild, wild west. What do you think when in this environment with access to these sophisticated data hacking tools so easily available on the dark web, it seems to favor the criminals. What do you think needs to be done to level the playing field to limit the criminal environment that's out there?
Thank you, John, and thank you, EIS, for inviting me. Shalom to all of you. It's a very amazing question because it brings me immediately to the issue of what is the role of the government. And when we are speaking about all kinds of tools, tech tools that are already in the market, not only in the dark web, sometimes you can just buy it from other places with other names, things has to be changed. And one of the most important things that I believe is that we have to identify cyber attack as a terrorism activism, as a terrorist activism, meaning because today you don't have to be a government or a non-state organization. Every hacker who is trying to change our policy, to change our way of life, to change our situation, for me, is a real terrorist. Why do I identify it as a terrorism? Because terrorism would like to make and to create chaos. And if this is the issue, the government has to take care immediately. Taking care immediately, and I believe I will speak about it later, is that the government has to invest huge amount of money, first of all, to make the government sides and the awareness as a top priority, be prepared, and also to support, and that's what we have done in Israel, local industries in order to come out with new solutions.
Outstanding, Rami. I think your thoughts on our next session we go to are going to be very central to the theme. But thank you for that input. But let me bring Brian into this discussion real quickly. Brian, you know, given the what we're seeing in the number of attacks in the growing list of system vulnerabilities, as I spoke to a few minutes ago, how do you see the convergence of IT, OT, and this dramatic rise in physical security requirements playing out to improve resilience? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me. First, an apology. This is not my living room. This is a hotel backdrop. This is not my decor of choice. But thanks for having me. And you know, some of the other speakers have said some awesome things. I'm trying not to repeat what has already been said. But with Paul Stockton, what he said about misinformation, disinformation, spot on. I think it is a cancer that we're seeing right now in the United States of America. What Jonathan said about convergence, I think is spot on, and I'll tack onto that. I think it's IT, I think it's OT, but I think it's also physical security convergence coming together as well. Whether it's access control, it's badging, it's cameras, a lot of that is IP based. And so what we don't want to have is our physical security systems also be the enemy avenue of approach to get into the larger system. You know, one of my concerns too, as we embrace convergence, is our CSOs, our companies, are the board embracing convergence organizationally. I think right now we have artificially created a number of silos where, you know, cybersecurity, you're over in the CIO shop. Physical security, you're somewhere under the chief administrative officer somewhere, where in reality we need to bring this under a chief security officer. Fortunately, within Avangrid, we've been able to embrace that, and we've seen some dividends with that. One of my chief concerns right now is, and I'll put my energy hat on just for a second, is as we embrace resilience, as we bring on more renewables into our space and we lean on those renewables, we need to ensure that those renewables are just as secure as the 800 megawatt generation facility right down the road. We need to ensure from a third-party supply chain risk perspective that we know where we're getting those materials, and we can ascertain and we can determine that there aren't manufacturer defects laying in wait, so to speak, within our renewables portfolio. And so right now is all of this, you know, wind turbines and solar farms are coming online. I do not want that to be a risk for the United States of America. I think we're making significant investments in this particular space. They also need to be secure investments. And I think convergence plays a major role with this. So I'll stop there, but great question so far.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Great response too. I look forward to your other comments. Let me see if I can get Paul and Yossi to come back on for just a second. Paul, I was very much intrigued with your comments about disinformation and the idea of disinformation and its impact on critical infrastructure operations. The question I'd like to have you give me a short response on is, how do we communicate the risk and the requirements to not only the public, but also private sector to achieve this increase in resilience that we need? What are your thoughts?
Leveraging the thoughts that Brian just shared on convergence, there's another form of convergence that we need to share with infrastructure owners and operators and the American public. And that is the risk that if adversaries conduct cyber attacks against the grid or other critical infrastructure sectors, they'll pair those attacks with information operations. We need to consider the risk of a new form of convergence. Christine Wormuth, the Secretary of the Army, said just earlier this week that if there's a confrontation between the United States and China over Taiwan, we should expect China to conduct cyber attacks against the US grid in order to be able to affect the American public. But they'll pair those attacks with information operations in order to incite panic, create public disaffection from the government, and convince us to bail on defense of our allies, and potentially use IOs to target the CEOs of grid companies so they will not provide mutual assistance, because they'll be faced with a threat that if they assist their fellow utilities, they'll be hit next. Thank you.
Yeah, outstanding perspective there. Yossi, what's your thought on dealing with this disinformation campaign opportunity against critical infrastructure operations? How do you view talking to the private sector that you support and also the public, which is critically dependent on all the services that you provide?
First of all, I will not repeat what was already said, but I very agree with Paul. First of all, one of the things, maybe I will put it in a simple question. We are always talking about critical infrastructure, critical processes, critical. Those processes today are more and more enlarging. There are more processes, and for example, the internet, the social networks and everything are actually additional critical infrastructure, if you allow me to call it like this. And those are actually the enablers of the ability to manipulate socially, and it's done by information. So our actually attitude to do it is based first of all on education. And when I say education, we have a model that we call triple T model. The triple T model means train, train, train. You know, you can actually create new structures and new integrated entities in your organization or in the country. But if we will not actually make higher the awareness of people and actually the self responsibility of protecting information, we will actually open door to huge abilities of the adversaries to manipulate not only the information, but to manipulate people, to manipulate processes, to push pressure on the leaders of the companies or leaders of the nation, and more and more. So what is our attitude is actually starting from very deep and thorough education of people to bring them and to turn the understanding of the criticality of the information and data to be as one of the most critical things that they are responsible for them today, starting from the person, one person, up to the organizations and communities.
Outstanding. Very much an education and training perspective on how to solve this. Very good, Yossi. I appreciate that. Let me bring in Liz and Brian now for this next question. Liz, you know, we read off a number of different attack vectors earlier on, and we talked about the scenario, but the bottom line is people have to take action. Companies have to take action. What do you think the right perspective is on companies that simply fail to prepare or leave themselves vulnerable? What do you think the steps need to be taken there to achieve a higher level of resilience?
Yeah, so you know, one of the things I like to say is that there's really no excuse to avoid the conversation today about this topic. So years ago when I started in this business, you know, people would say, you do what for a living? Like, you work on what? I'm sorry. And today cyber is really dinner table conversation. So, you know, I in my mind, if cyber is on the front page of every newspaper that anybody's reading, and that conversations are not happening in an organization, there's something really wrong with that. We need to bring cyber out of the back office, out of the IT organization, into the front office, into the boardroom, into leadership conversations. And we have to convince our friends and colleagues that it is not a taboo topic. I don't like to talk about cyber in the context of fear and uncertainty. I like to say that this is the world that we're living in, right? We operate in ecosystem-oriented businesses, whether public or private sector, or even better, in collaboration. But we must have this conversation. And, You know, I spoke with an organization last year that's a healthcare organization that has very limited resources. And what the leader in cyber told me is that they spend the entirety of their cybersecurity budget annually on their membership in the Health ISAC. And I think that one of the things that organizations can do is think about an industry information sharing type of an entity to get the benefit of the way better resourced organizations are talking about cyber defenses, cyber actions that can be taken, and leverage the community, whether that's public-private sector or industry-specific organizations, to try to activate these conversations. Because frankly, there is no organization, large or small, that has really any basis for ignoring this conversation today.
Great response. Let me turn it over to Brian though. Brian, back to the pointy end of this particular question is, what do we do about companies that simply fail to prepare their infrastructure or their people that put us all at risk?
I think what Liz said is absolutely spot on. If you're not having this conversation at the board level 4 times a year quarterly, you're wrong. You're doing it wrong. This needs to be a constant conversation. This isn't, the nerdy guy in the corner, with a tinfoil hat talking about. This is a business risk that we all need to address. But within my own organization, I think many of yours as well, I think we operate with the understanding that bad things are going to happen. There's no such thing as risk elimination. It's about risk reduction. And so I assume that at some point, the energy sector at large, even my own organization, we will see some sort of a data breach. And when you see that, or you say that to your board, you see the eyes get really, really big, and you feel like you're surprising them, but really there should be no surprises whatsoever. When you have other companies that have, billion-dollar cybersecurity programs also seeing breaches, why should we not expect to see something very, very similar? And so I think the name of the game is response. It's recovery. It's testing. It's having the right people around the table and, exercising this, whether it's GridX, whether it's Liberty Eclipse, or it's just, periodic and random red teaming. We need to be prepared for our worst day. And it's all about coming back to homeostasis as quick as we possibly can. I will tell you that coming from a former CISA perspective, as a former political over there, the cavalry is not coming. It's not coming. And so that first 72 hours, we really need to figure out a way using our own resources, our own vendors, our own consultants, our own third parties to help us come back to response and recovery as quick as we possibly can. That is the name of the game. It doesn't get any more simple than that.
And by the way, Brian, I just, I wanted to, I couldn't agree more, and forgive me for chiming in here, but this question of how resilient can you be is at the heart of all of this, because no one is exempt here. And the day that we all accept that no one is exempt, the biggest and brightest among us have been hit. So if they can be hit, so can everybody else. And I think that's really critical.
Yeah, outstanding. Thanks, guys. You took that question and really answered it for the entire audience. Let me shift gears here for a second. We're going to go into the second phase. This is a much more dramatic scenario. I'd love to tell you that this was all fictional, but a lot of what you're about to hear, I actually pulled from recent reports. So let's begin session 2, the cyber future, non-state versus state actors. What does it mean? In early May of 2024, U.S. naval forces conducting freedom of navigation patrols in the South China Sea, just east of the highly contested Spratly Islands, loses all of its communications capabilities, stranding the fleet, including its secure network. Only after navigating several hundred nautical miles further east could the flotilla again communicate. Later in May, at a NATO air base in North Africa, they lost all power, impacting environmental control systems, water systems, and air traffic control systems. Within hours of the NATO incident, the London Stock Exchange Group, a global stock exchange composed of the London Stock Exchange, the Deutsche Börse Exchange, which operates Europe's third largest stock exchange, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, Xterra, went offline. It took over 48 hours to restore operations, and it sent stocks crashing, even though controls were in place. Portions of the network infrastructure had to be completely rebuilt. Officials called it the work of a sophisticated network of players and warned of future attacks designed to impact other global exchanges and bond markets in an attempt to disrupt liquidity, the integrity of data, and transactions between importers and exporters, thus disrupting global supply chains. Within weeks in Australia, investigators found records including the name, tax information, and banking details for over 80,000 South Australian government employees on the dark web. In late May of that same year, a cyber attack on France's nationwide fuel distribution system paralyzed that country as 4,300 gas stations, which took 12 days to have service fully restored. A report shared the stories of a local dentist who drove around for hours in search of gasoline, waiting in long lines at 4 different gas stations only to come home empty. In the US at the same time, a well-known broadcaster with political ambitions panicked as intimate details of his sex life and those of hundreds of thousands of others were stolen from a dating site and were then uploaded to a social media platform. The simulation, which was caused by what officials call sophisticated players, featured several different types of attacks. In early June, analysts reported that Russia, as a potential prelude to achieving a war footing, took a number of steps, including establishing supply lines, opening field hospitals, and deploying air defense systems such as the bulk surface-to-air system that are needed to protect its heavy weaponry and troops near the front on its western border. Unfortunately, within hours of this analysis being released, the director of U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and the Secretary of Defense make public statements about a hack on some of the most protected systems in use by both the public and the private sector. The details were initially revealed by the Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit, and Microsoft reports indicated that the source of the hack was China, but some industry insiders questioned the analysis. Within hours of these events happening, reports began coming in from around the world that regional power systems and communication systems went offline. Impacted nations were plunged initially into darkness. Given that scenario, and as I mentioned, many of those events pulled from actually modern news sources, Paul, I'd like to go back to you to set the stage. Obviously, when we reach this level of attack, there are a number of serious national security implications. What do we need to be concerned with when that happens? Because as you and I have talked about, it is a likely scenario. From the information standpoint, what is the most critical thing that we need to be concerned with?
Well, I love that the scenario starts out with information because I think we have 2 challenges here. The first is how utilities are going to restore operations in the face of adversary efforts to deny communications capabilities, just as the US Navy's suffered in your scenario. NERC alert systems based on internet communications, they have dubious survivability against China's strategic support force. Let's get real. Public switch phone networks? No. And if you think that sat phones are going to function in an environment like this, go and read the recent DoD assessment of Chinese military doctrine. Came out 3 weeks ago. Space is going to be the first target in a war, and space communications assets will be prime targets for attack. So everything that we know about the communication systems that we currently rely on need to be reassessed. The second point, though, in your scenario is we need to understand that communications is a contested environment, not only in terms of the survivability of the comm systems on which utilities will depend, but for public messaging. We can anticipate that China and Russia, in a conflict with the United States, will flood the United States with disinformation, convey their propaganda, and cut off the means of communication that the president will rely on in order to conduct messaging to the American people. information environment is going to be contested. It's not going to look anything at all like when utilities try to talk to their customers about estimated times of restoration. There will be Chinese and Russian propaganda to convey panic-oriented messaging, cast doubt on American leadership, and at the same time, they kill off the communication systems on which power restoration and public messaging by the president will depend. Thanks.
Outstanding, Paul. Definitely on target. Let me bring Yossi in now to his perspective. Yossi, in this scenario with a significant number of critical infrastructure systems around the world going offline, what become your top priorities in Israel for protecting your systems?
So let's start like it. I think that the top priority, or one of the toughest priority, is very similar to what just a minute ago Paul described. Actually, the next war or the next threat will not be based on hitting directly your physical generation units or physical network assets, or not even the control systems. It will be actually hitting the ability to communicate, the ability to transfer, the ability to manage the crisis and everything. So one of the biggest, I would say, orientation of our efforts is actually how to create the best possibility to keep the communication running. Second thing, and maybe I will talk a little bit in a minute about the characteristic of cyber from a different point of view. Actually, how it is different from the conventional weapons and use or the non-cyber weapons. And the main difference is, and I will talk now about Chinese, but in more positive way, I will mention Sun Tzu, that said about 2,500 years ago that all warfare is based on deception and manipulation. And actually, cyber, one of the main differences that is in comparison to the traditional and conventional weapons is actually embedded ability to manipulate and to decept very easily, very cheaply, and very, very easy to deploy. So if I combine it, one of the things that we should take care and put the focus on it is actually see those things that Paul described, and if I can add many others that are not directly anymore touching the physical or the tangible systems we are protecting and using and managing. I don't say we have to stop to protect them, but we have to think about additional things, and this is what we are doing. Additional things that by indirect abilities of manipulation and deception, they will actually ruin our ability to operate and to provide our vital processes.
Hey, thanks, Yossi. That's an excellent focusing comment that where we need to place our energies. Let me bring Mark into this discussion real quickly here. Mark, by all indications in this scenario, we're in a period of undeclared war. We've had that happen in our past as well. But in this situation, since everyone says the next war is likely going to be a cyber or have cyber components, are there specific actions that Congress would take to prioritize immediate action as either a response or a protective measure? What are your thoughts along those lines?
So first, what I'd say is that, these are right on that, I think probably depending on attribution, we've probably popped above that gray zone, below the use of force response. In other words, I think I'm going to assume for a moment that our intelligence community has some good attribution. That's a tough assumption. And there's attribution that they would share with each other and attribution they would share with the public. But it would kick off what I believe would be some pretty aggressive, forward defense, use of potentially kinetic tools, although I think that's the least likely, cyber tools, economic tools, law enforcement tools, diplomatic tools to try to push back on this. I think principally what you would see is the use of cyber tools to go and impose cost on those cyber actors that were seen as being responsible for each of these different things. Some of them looked like they were definitively nation state. I think taking down, although that Navy communications network, I think I experienced that weekly as a strike group commander at sea due to whenever we did cryptographic rollovers. But I'll assume for a moment that we attributed this to a Chinese APT, that we would go do some events there. Some of the other ones might be criminal actors acting on behalf of nation states, and there, you would temper how you went after them, and certainly you would start to use your economic tools to impose cost on the adversary. But you're going to have to use that full kind of toolkit of forward defense missions, across the different agencies of government. And so I think that's what you do. Additionally, I think the most important thing is to immediately, and this is where we're not good, get to attribution with allies and partners so that your allies and partners are participating with you in this, in either the sanctions or the offensive cyber operations or wherever it is. And I think that's an area where, I'll give you one quick example. If the Iranians launched a cruise missile at a Saudi Aramco facility, we identify it within, say, 3 to 5 minutes that was a Iranian cruise missile. When they launch a cyber attack, even though we have some reasonable attribution capabilities, it could be 3 to 5 weeks or months before you attribute it to Iran. We have to shorten that timeline to minutes and hours, not weeks and months, and then share that information openly with our allies and partners and with the private sector so that we have a collective response to this inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame the kind of the potential vectors that we could take a look at. So outstanding. Thanks for that. Let me bring John Munkin in now. John, I'd like to kind of switch up here a little bit. In this scenario, while we're not seeing the kind of devastation that we've seen in Puerto Rico, for example, during the hurricane, it's obvious that basic support systems are being threatened. What do you think the major utility providers would do to make significant changes in their resilience posture, or would they actually need to wait and see if they are impacted before taking action? What do you think?
Well, certainly, I think just as a general principle, you want to be as proactive as possible and not reactive. And I think if you take Puerto Rico as a baseline, I think there's two advantages, if you want to describe them this way, to the type of physical impacts associated with something like a hurricane. One of which is the mitigation strategies are generally clear and when you understand the value of redundancy or hardening of physical assets. And then two, when you're doing the damage assessment process, it's obvious what's broken, what's not. Even if it's devastating like it was in Puerto Rico, at least you have an idea of what's out there. On the cyber side, I think we can take a similar lesson here and understand that from a physical impact standpoint, it's going to be very difficult to identify. So trying to really try and unpack the event in the midst of it in a damage response mode is certainly not a position that any owner operator wants to find themselves in. But two, I think understanding what the primary means of mitigation look like to try and avoid those types of outcomes as a result of a cyber attack or utilizing that particular hazard or vector really needs to change the thought paradigm about how utilities approach these types of circumstances, because you can apply the principles of physical infrastructure to the cyber environment of saying, what does your level of redundancy look like when you're talking about industrial control systems and SCADA systems, of understanding the need for data availability and integrity, the types of components within substations and critical assets that have potential vulnerabilities associated with those types of cyber breaches, and understanding what you can do to improve or bolster the redundancy of your system that's actually supporting those physical assets. So understanding what you can do to employ practices like zero trust networks, or understanding that new devices that are going on the system are not adding to the attack surface area, they're actually bolstering what you're doing to try and verify the integrity of data and the potential for identifying compromises in physical assets on your system should be part of how utilities really approach this. Because if you wait till the event to try and create that redundancy of those cyber physical systems, you're not going to get there. It's actually even harder to try and get the finite amount of resources that are available from a personnel and hardware and software perspective, because there is a more robust network of mutual assistance and mutual aid for physical assets than there is for cyber. So knowing that only should it motivate companies to go out there and say what level of redundancy is appropriate to maintain these essential systems that give us visibility into these assets for real-time operation, real-time dispatch, and just ask different questions about what your fallback systems look like in that environment, just as you would for a physical attack.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of a proactive approach to better understanding what the opportunities are and then applying those resilience measures where they make sense. Great response. Thanks, John. Dave Hill, let me bring you in here for a second. Using the scenario that we talked about, we've already seen in that scenario that supply chains in at least one country have been impacted. But how difficult do you think it would be for that attack vector towards the supply chains to expand to reach other nations? And what should suppliers be prepared to do to protect their cyber capabilities?
I think certainly everyone is vulnerable. And I think there's, we all use similar systems, and, everyone should be working on the concept that, yes, we are vulnerable and we will likely be attacked. And what can we do? I think the key thing, again, is to pay attention to what's going on. I mean, even with the SolarWinds event, companies detected small anomalies. They were there, but sometimes people don't know what they're looking at. The people that are actually out in the field doing the work may not be in the IT groups. We need to do, I think Yoshi said it correctly: train, train, train. They need to understand that sometimes when something's happening on their system, they may need to raise a flag and say, hey, what's going on here? Secondly, redundancy, trying to look at ways we can be redundant and have not rely on a specific system or a specific vendor. I think that's absolutely critical, because just because you've got a backup, you've got some backup systems, you have to ask yourself if they've been working, if the people looking to do harm here have been at this for 6 months, are my backup systems even secure, or has the vulnerability already made it into them? So you need to practice. I think you need to take a hard look at assuming it's going to happen, and then how am I going to recover from that, and actually do some drills and do some training to make sure that that your supply chains can continue to be supplied, and work very, very closely with vendors. Not just a single vendor may be certainly can be a problem. So I think look at redundancy as much as you can.
Yeah, redundancy and understand your backup systems, great attributes that need to factor into this, especially given this scenario. Liz, let me bring you into this discussion. We talked yesterday about unconstrained volatility on the finance sector is a very, very bad thing. In this scenario, we've seen one of the major exchanges take what appears to be a pretty direct hit. What actions would you expect to see in the other major exchanges and in the supported financial institutions to be as resilient as possible given this particular scenario?
You painted quite a bleak scenario. All of the things of recent life all coming together to one, right? What I would point to is some of the comments that Mark made earlier about allies, and I would encourage all industries to consider who are their allies, both public and private, because I think in these situations, we all need to recognize in any given industry that one bad incident is bad for the whole industry. So in the case of financial exchanges, it could be about global exchanges coming together and sharing intel. It might even be, and this could sound crazy, but the ability to somehow collaborate in the recovery, because it's not good for networks or supply chains or exchanges or any industry group to see one element of the industry fail and fail hard. I think about all the conversation about supply chain today. And one of the things I'm thinking a lot about is the contagious nature of a cyber attack inside of a supply chain, and that we have to start looking at our supply chain beyond the boundaries of those with whom we have direct relationships. So we have talked for years about third-party management, who are the third parties in our ecosystem who are contributing to what we do. And today we need to look at fourth, fifth, sixth party relationships where we don't have direct connection, but in fact, vulnerabilities in those distant connections can come to haunt us, right? And it can catch us ill-prepared because of the levels of abstraction between us and the source of the attack. So if my supply chain is contingent upon a distribution organization that is working with another party that gets hit, and that ransomware event or that cyber attack affects that distribution channel, what's the downstream impact to me, and how would I even know about it, and how long would it take? So I think that number one is the question of understand the reach of your ecosystem and start thinking about vulnerabilities that might exist 1, 2, 3 levels of abstraction away, and recognize that the only way to recover when the attack hits at levels of abstraction away from you is if you have allies in the mix. So whether it's government allies or economic allies or industry peers, building those relationships so that in the time of crisis, there's some path to an exit that's faster and more resilient than you would be on your own. I think we're going to see a world that's more and more receptive to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think what you just described is probably the biggest business takeaway from the pandemic, is better understanding the diversity in those supply chains and where the vulnerabilities exist. Great response. Thank you for that. Let me bring Rami in. Let me bring Rami in right now. Rami, I'm going to circle back to kind of the core utility functions. I know you're familiar with the term a black sky event, something that the council is very much focused on. Given the scenario that we painted, what would it take to have this situation that we described expand to present a full-on regional black sky event? And if you can explain that, then what do we need to think about to prevent that situation from occurring?
I was not surprised from all the scenarios that you have started this conversation. And I believe that we have to change our attitude. I'll start with an Israeli case. May 21st, during Guardian of the Wall, Israel retaliated and bombed the operational center of the cyber of the Hamas. This was something new, an attack by a kinetic solution against a cyber attack. This is something I wanted to speak about it first, because I think we have to change our attitude to cyber. For me, cyber is killing the same way that a kinetic war is killing. I know about black sky. I believe that cyber can make a kind of black sky, that's for sure. And that's why we have to change our attitude. When I say our, I'm starting usually with the government, not with the companies, not with the enterprises. I think that we have to understand that we have to believe that we are all being already attacked, and things has to be changed. First of all, we have to identify again what are critical infrastructures these days. Is it only utilities, financial? Is it everything that we are doing? What about drones? What about others? We have to look also about the new kind of attacks that we are facing. I believe that we will speak about technology, so I'm not going now into that. I think that in order to make sure that we will not face a black sky, it's not only regulations, it's not only black practices, it's also to legally at a new world. And in the new world, I believe, this is my thoughts only, we have to build a new internet that will be designed against cyber attacks. Cyber by design is going to be our way of thinking on everything. If we will just try to plaster every leakage, every small attack on our facilities, we are going to face new kind of attacks that will bring the black sky. But if we will be prepared, and I totally agree to all of you who are saying about what we should do, and this is not going to be done by one company or two companies. This is going to be done as a cooperation of countries, of governments. Only that way we will not be exposed to a kind of black sky. Is it going to take 1 day or two? No, it will take some years, but we need to start it immediately. Otherwise, we will face all the examples that you have spoken about in your first presenting this part of the conversation.
No, outstanding response. I appreciate you introducing that idea of a new internet. Very, very thought-provoking, ambitious idea, but probably one whose time has come. Brian, let me bring you in here for the last comments on this particular scenario. In this scenario, we are a nation at war. Maybe it's not traditionally declared, but we're at war nonetheless. And given your background with Homeland Security, what steps do you think we must take to protect our critical infrastructure and forge that new level of public and private partnership to achieve that higher resilience posture?
Yeah, a couple thoughts as the conversation is going. I'm thinking back and kind of hearkening back to my Marine Corps days a long, long time ago. And you know, in DoD space, you have what's known as threat condition delta. You know, something has happened throughout the United States, and now we have this posture aboard military installations. And it's better perimeter security, it's more guards, it's more weapons, et cetera, et cetera. The vigilance goes way, way up. I think within the private sector, especially in the energy sector, we should have a very similar posture. And really, what does that mean? I think it means we are actively monitoring our systems in real time. We're utilizing the sensors that we have on our IT systems, our OT systems, et cetera. And it is all hands on deck. We are briefing through incident command to the board and providing situation awareness updates to not only our own CEO in the C-suite, but also the electricity ISAC, also our federal partners at CISA and the FBI, et cetera. But from a public-private partnership perspective, I think the federal government has done an excellent job. And yes, I came from there recently, but I think they've done a very good job of pushing information into the private sector. Conversely, I don't think that the private sector has done a very good job of pushing information back into federal space. And frankly, good information going in is going to create good information coming back out that we can all consume. And so I think there's some opportunities for improvement in sharing with our federal partners. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you that there is a trust deficit that still exists. We have seen some very active and real cases where the private sector shares information with our government partners, and all of a sudden it's out in the wild. It's on you know, USA Today or the Washington Post, et cetera, and that scares the heck out of everyone else who's taking notes, saying, wow, I don't want to share information anymore because I see the potential risk or impact to our reputation. So I think there's some opportunities there, but I think the private sector probably has the biggest opportunity in sharing good, relevant, and practical information with our federal partners.
Outstanding response, Brian. I think that two-way information sharing is definitely critical for going forward. Very, very on point. Let me bring Mark and Dave back in for just a second, a little back and forth here. Mark, from your perspective, you know, part of what we describe in this is the advent of the non-state bad actor. What do we do to find these bad actors or the bad guys, and what are we going to be able to do to penalize them for the actions that they're taking? Mark, I don't see your camera coming up. Are you still available? Mark may have had to drop off. There we go.
No, I'm here. Can you repeat the question? My audio cut out.
Sure. No, it's welcome to the internet today, right? No, the question focuses on in the scenario, we kind of introduced the idea of non-state bad actors. State on state war has happened for forever, right? But now we're talking about the advent using cyber for non-state bad actors to really disrupt the operations and the way of life of these countries that they choose to pick on. What do we do to find these guys? And then what should the penalties be when we find them? And then I'll follow that up with Dave.
Yeah, first thing I want to say is absolutely for both non-state actors and state actors, you have to practice the parts of deterrence that are denial. In other words, building a good defense. And the perfect example is the non-state actor, because it's very hard to impose cost on non-state actors. On state actors, they have assets that you can impose cost on. That does not exist for the non-state actors, or there's much less of it. So first of all, that is a perfect argument for why you do have to invest in some of your defensive capabilities. Now, how do you impose costs? First of all, what you do is you have to identify who is abetting and supporting those non-state actors, because there are people who do that. You know, look, we're seeing that in Russia, where the ransomwares or service providers such as DarkSide or Ransomware Evil or Revil are abetted and supported by the Russian state. And we have to hold the Russian state accountable after we try to hold the ransomware as a service provider accountable. And you hold them in different ways. Ransomware as a service provider, you might try cyber attacks that put friction into their system, make their cyber infrastructure less effective, maybe pick their cryptocurrency pockets. But the state that's supporting them, that's going to take sanctions. And that's why you have to work with allies and partners, as I said earlier, because at some point your own sanctions reach saturation. And so we really, in the case of, for example, Russia, need to work with Germany to hold Russia accountable, and some of the other Western European countries. That's the first thing I'd say. And then if someone's foolish enough as like an independent contractor working for a ransomware service provider to be living in a country where we have extradition, then you bring in the law enforcement. Because right now, indictments of like North Korean hackers, I think the next thing that happens is that North Korean hacker gets a medal from Kim Jong-un, not a ticket on an extradition flight. So it's critical that if they're in a country where we can hold them accountable, either through extradition or through the local, the law enforcement mechanisms of that country, that we hold people accountable with that law enforcement tool. Otherwise, I think it's going to be principally economic and cyber offensive operation tools.
Yeah, I totally agree with the direction that you took that, and we just need to get better at it. Dave, from your perspective, what do you think what's the response for how do we deal with these non-state bad actors, and what should the penalties be?
Well, I think Mark hit it right on the head. You know, certainly with the non-state bad actors, it's a lot more difficult because many of them are operating in areas where we don't have the ability, we don't have addition, we don't have law enforcement, and so you know, picking their cryptocurrency pocket, I think is one good approach. Certainly, they're generally in this for the money, and they're looking for a way to fund something, terrorism or whatever it is that they're funding. And so you'll need to, you know, we need to do everything we can, and it may be even if you can counterattack where they're working from. But if they're operating within a state, and many of them, and they are, if you can work with that state to have them arrested. Many of you may not know this, but my son is a very much into this even in the law enforcement side. And anytime keep track of these players, and in some cases they tend to mess up, and so you can't just pay attention to them right now while they're attacking, but keep on them, and at some point they're going to slip up, and maybe they'll set foot in a country with extradition, and just literally we're just going to have to go after them. I think that's the only way to do it for the non-state actors. You just have to take every potential avenue, just consider an attack vector back on them. Every potential avenue you can attack them back. We probably should be doing that.
Yeah, great response. Let's move forward into this next phase. I could ask you all questions all day long. You've got such a wealth of background, but I want to give everybody a chance to kind of put forward what your top cyber recommendations are, the things the 1, 2, or 3 things that absolutely need to be prioritized. Paul, I'm going to come back to you using your background with national security and obviously as one of the key members of the EIS Council. What do you think the top couple of things need to be that we absolutely need to take actions on for cyber?
I want to go back to a very important point that Mark Montgomery made, and that is we need the ability to impose costs in order to deter attacks on the United States. But applying that to the information realm requires a little thinking. We have now a deeply asymmetric environment for information. The United States is open to daily information operations by China and Russia, and Xi Jinping has the luxury of cowering behind the Great Firewall and hiding his public from the truth. Now, the stupid way of dealing with this asymmetry, the wrong thing to do, would be to throw the Constitution overboard and imitate the controls over information that China and increasingly Russia have. That's the wrong way to go. We need to think about what kinds of information operations we might credibly threaten to conduct, and maybe even conduct them under certain circumstances that would impose costs on Chinese and Russian leaders that would be so fearful to them that they would back off from their ongoing campaign to corrode faith in democratic governance and in a crisis to shape US public and leadership perspectives. We need to think about moving beyond kinetic and other means of deterrence, including nuclear. Think about whether to add information operations as a tool to add to our quiver, if you will, of response options. Thanks.
Outstanding. I absolutely concur. Yossi, from your standpoint, what would you recommend? What are your top cyber recommendations?
So I have many of them, but I will pick up just 2 or 3 of them, and let's go to more. First of all, for one thing, and we heard it from Brian, Elizabeth, Dave. Somebody call it lack of back information. I call it cooperation. We have to improve significantly the cooperation between what I call good guys. This is the first thing. But the additional thing that is very important, I think, on the global level, is support the weak nations. And it's not only a thought because a nice thought and a social thought. These big nations are usually heavily involved in our supply chain because of their cheap labor. Many of different parts or systems or part of systems are produced there, and if there will be still the weak chain part of the chain, we will suffer from it. So supporting them by the strong countries and by our knowledge is, I think, one of the must to be changed as soon as possible. Go to more specific things, to additional things. One, in the OT and critical infrastructure and SCADA world, the validation abilities of an organization is very, very poor. This is actually one of the most biggest doors for the adversaries or chances for the adversaries to penetrate. So one of the things that we must do and must change is create validation services or validation abilities to organization to actually to be able to prove and validate any change or things that they are doing in their environment. And last thing that I would like to talk about, and again, I already heard about it from Brian and Elizabeth, is actually we are, I think, neglecting the part of the equation that is talking about the recovery. Good recovery, cheap recovery, and sure recovery actually reduces or minimizes the significance of any cyber vulnerability or any cyber attack. And we must to do it and to invest in it. A lot of effort that even, and somebody said already that the question is not if we will be compromised, but when we will be compromised. I not always agree with it, but there is a good probability that we will be in some stage compromise. Our answer should be not only to build the wall to protect ourselves, but also to build extraordinary ability to recover efficiently, cheaply, and without any critical consequences.
That's an outstanding addition to our capability suite. Great ads there, Yossi. Really appreciate that. Mark, what do you think? What, from your perspective, what are the top couple of cyber things? What are your recommendations that we need to move towards?
So, yeah, I said at the beginning, we have to move towards a strong compact between our systemically important critical infrastructure and the federal government. And so that'd be the first thing. Part of that is building the infrastructure for sharing information more rapidly. And then if I were to add, into that kind of like, that's technology and processes, I'd add in a strong people section, the third leg of that stool, that if we don't figure out, we can spend all we want on technology, we can grind away to get the policy and processes right. But if we continue to be underserved in the both the capacity, the number, and the capabilities, the skill sets held by our cybersecurity workforce, we're never going to achieve the kind of security we need for deterrence to work throughout all cyberspace. So very specifically in that regard, the federal government has to close its gap, which is probably about 30% of the workforce is either the wrong person or in a vacant, the job is vacant. And if you look at the heat maps, I'm not sure the exact numbers are right, but there's somewhere around 1/3 of the totality of the cybersecurity workforce nationally. So about 500,000, if you believe the numbers, are open jobs. I think what Microsoft and other companies are doing by beginning to invest in community colleges to produce people with the right certificates, to get them into the apprentice jobs so they can work for 3 to 5 years and then recycle through training to get the journeyman jobs, so they can, and then 5 years later recycle to get the kind of tradesman job, you know what I mean, work their way through that cycle will be good. But if we don't attack that third leg of the stool, the personnel stool, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So systemically important critical infrastructure and get the personnel right.
Yeah, Mark, I absolutely agree with you. Haven't seen that myself, but I got to tell you, you just won thousands of cyber warriors fandom across the globe because they're all clapping because somebody brought that to the forefront. Nice ad there. John, you've worked both sides of this equation. What are some of your cyber recommendations to better protect ourselves and become more resilient?
I just wanted to make sure it was this John.
Yeah, you're the only one on other than me, brother.
Oh, wow, that never happens. Okay, great. I'll take that. That's a badge of honor. Yeah, but I think it's well said when we talk about what it looks like from a cyber workforce standpoint, but I think there's a lot of nuts and bolts that are out there that I think end up drawing an unnecessary amount of the focus, meaning a lot of times this is framed solely as a technical issue of saying, do we have the technical capability to develop the necessary cyber protections in order to make this thing happen? And what I would really offer up right now is recognizing that the actual strategy aspect of this is not enough of an area of focus. So essentially saying it's not just about the vacancies, and this was just brought up, it's not just about the vacancies, it's not just about the certifications, it's about understanding from within your organization and from within your company, what does risk actually look like in this particular space, and trying to understand how you allocate these finite resources related to things like the prevention, protection, mitigation aspects of what you're really doing. And so I think a lot of times what happens is people skip the strategy phase of it. They go for the shiny ball of a particular technological solution that's going to solve one piece of the puzzle, but they don't actually put the corner pieces and the edge pieces of the puzzle together first. So it's a piece without an understanding as to where it fits in the broader strategy of an organization. And I think that's an area that needs additional emphasis here of saying, from a risk-based standpoint, where do you need to prioritize the investment? And then how do you actually align resources, both technical and from a personnel standpoint, to try and address the areas of highest need? Because there's just no circumstance where, you know, and Liz alluded to this earlier, like you can be $1 billion company with an unbelievable cyber capability and still have vulnerabilities in your system. So people should not be under the mistaken impression that this is about batting 1,000, right? There's only two kinds of companies, those that have been breached and those that don't know it yet, right? It's going to happen one way or another. So I think people just need to focus on the strategy piece to try and understand how they can align their internal capabilities, their contracted capabilities, the technical solutions that are potentially out there, and what's really going to provide maximum value, because you just have to approach it from a different mentality.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The strategic planning portion of this is something that's been sorely missing. But you know, the evolution of the systems is going so fast that a lot of people just can't catch up. But absolutely on target. Great ad. Thank you, Dave. What would be your recommendations for fixing our cyber posture? Anything come to mind?
Well, several things. And again, thank you. I think certainly many of them have been hit on already in the discussions. One of the things that I've been talking about for several years, Brian, I think, hit upon it, is, you know, bringing your security together. You know, a corporate security group. In the utility industry, we typically have OT security and IT security and physical security. And all of these systems are relying, you know, on internet-based systems, and so we should just bring all of the security together. And from that, you can provide some real training. And I'm not just talking about training for the cyber specialists and the IT and the OT folks. I think you really need to get training into the people that are operating the critical equipment, you know, your system operators, everybody that's involved, to know what to look for. They're sitting there 24/7 on a system, and they may not even know what to look for or who to call when they see something unusual. Resiliency and recovery, I think we really need to do that. You need to accept that something's going to go wrong, and you need to start thinking about how are you going to recover from that. I was just shocked the other day when I read that an electric co-op in Colorado lost 25 years worth of data and could do no billing. Yet in a world today, it's like you lost 25 years worth of your data. Where have you been? You know, that's just kind of my question. And then I think lastly, partnerships. We've mentioned government and with other, you know, your suppliers, your supply chain. You really do need to work on those partnerships. And as you're thinking about that recovery, who can you know, it's basically who can you call to help you get out of this situation, and how quickly can you possibly do that and bring some other resources and knowledge to bear and share experiences across those partnerships. You know, Brian mentioned that, I think, too, that you know, when some things show up on CNN or on you know, in the media that didn't make you look the best. People don't want to share, but I think we have to do that, and we have to find ways to make sure that we keep that information flow going. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, Dave, you hit on a number of points that Liz and I got a chance to talk about yesterday. Liz, let me bring you in for your thoughts. I think Dave kind of set you up on some of the professional level of systems management that needs to occur. But what would be your top priorities for cyber?
I think that's right. And in the interest of time, I'll tell you my top three that came to mind. Mark mentioned workforce development. I want to add to that the notion of diversity of that workforce, and to really encourage people to start thinking beyond the typical hires and the typical talent that are needed for cyber, because you heard throughout this presentation questions of geopolitical agendas, of political science understanding, of human interaction understanding, executive presence. There's a lot of skills out there that can be retooled to be meaningful game changers in this fight against cyber threat. So I would encourage people to think not only in terms of conventional diversity, but also in terms of diversity of background, of educational background and professional background. That's number one. Number two, know your ecosystem. And as Yossi said, you know who your good guys are, lean in to those good guys and take advantage of the notion of a consortium around you, because you will need allies when this thing happens. And the third thing that I wanted to discuss is to think about innovating around the deployment of controls in alignment with some of the prioritization discussions that we had earlier in today's chat. And that means that we don't have to spread controls like peanut butter and protect everything with equal rigor. We have to think about that which matters most and think about dynamic insertion of controls of friction in order to protect those things that align to the things that must be protected at an optimal level. So kind of an aligned deployment of cyber controls in accordance with your understanding of strategic intent. That's from me. Thank you.
Great list, but you launched in my brain something I don't think I'll be able to shake loose, which is the idea of spreading controls like peanut butter. It's a great analogy, but it's going to be hard to shake.
right.
Let me bring Rami in. Rami, you've worked on this area for a number of years now. What are your top couple of cyber recommendations you'd like to see move into common practice?
Starting with the governments. I believe, so first of all, the governments have to encourage the private sector to become much stronger in cyber. How do you do it? Reduce their taxes whenever they are making their cybersecurity higher than expected. If you are going to do it, you will find out that everybody would like to have a much stronger cybersecurity, and therefore the government or the country will be much stronger. The second one, those who doesn't have cyber law have to adopt special cyber laws